On February 14, 1942, in the basement of Harvard University's Converse Laboratory, an event occurred that could confidently be called a chemical breakthrough. In the dimly lit room, a match was struck, and Professor Louis Fieser held the flame to a small sample of jellied gasoline. Contrary to expectations, the fuel did not instantly explode as it usually would. Instead, the flame steadily enveloped the substance, burning persistently and refusing to extinguish. In his laboratory journal, Fieser noted that the secret lay in a combination of aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate, which created a gel-like consistency resembling applesauce and then hardened to a rubber-like state. The 42-year-old professor of organic chemistry put down his pen and reached for the secure telephone. He realized that his recent discovery could fundamentally alter the course of the war in the Pacific. This was a weapon capable of penetrating the most hidden caves, breaching the most impregnable bunkers, and destroying targets inaccessible to conventional bombs. However, Professor Fieser could not have imagined that his Valentine's Day discovery would herald the most destructive incendiary campaign in military history. The war in the Pacific taught American forces a harsh lesson. Japanese soldiers demonstrated an unyielding will and refused to surrender. They skillfully dug in, built fortifications, and fought fierce battles from positions that seemed invulnerable to ordinary weapons. The volcanic islands of the Pacific presented an ideal defensive landscape. The rocks were riddled with caves. Concrete bunkers were reinforced with coral reefs, and underground passages stretched for many miles. Iwo Jima alone boasted approximately 18 kilometers of subterranean fortifications. The defenders of Okinawa transformed ancient tombs into impregnable machine gun nests. Conventional bombs caused little significant damage, and artillery shells barely scratched the surface. It became clear that a new weapon was needed, one capable of reaching the depths where Japanese soldiers were entrenched. The answer to the napalm question came from a rather unexpected place, the halls of Harvard University, where a chemistry professor engaged in developing synthetic rubber was called to serve his country in wartime. Louis Frederick Fieser, a scientist who had previously opposed the development of poison gases but placed national interest above personal convictions, became a key figure in creating this terrifying weapon. Born in Ohio in 1899, Fieser dedicated his life to studying vitamin K and blood coagulation processes. However, fate decreed that he would go down in history as the creator of modern incendiary warfare. The first tests of the new substance took place in a most unusual location, Harvard's football field, near the business school and stadium. On July 4, 1942, Fieser placed about 20 kilograms of his developed compound into a shallow pool filled with water. Cambridge firefighters watched with apprehension while unsuspecting tennis players continued their game on adjacent courts. After the white phosphorus fuse was activated, the napalm instantly ignited. Fiery clumps of gel shot into the air and, falling into the water, continued to burn. Panicked tennis players scattered as the gel clung to everything it touched and could not be extinguished with water. The burning temperature reached 800 to 1200 degrees Celsius, making napalm an extremely dangerous and destructive weapon. At 2 degrees on the thermometer, Fieser's calculations proved impeccable. His innovative weapon generated heat 6 times greater than that of thermite. Unlike gasoline, which detonates as a massive fireball, napalm spewed forth a concentrated stream, targeting cave entrances, bunker cracks, and pillboxes. Thanks to aluminum soap compounds, the substance possessed a viscous structure, ensuring it adhered to various surfaces, uniforms, and skin. While conventional incendiary bombs in initial tests hit their target in only 1 out of 60 cases, napalm demonstrated astonishing effectiveness, striking its target in every third attack. Statistical data spoke for itself, but the true breakthrough was the chemical formula itself. Production immediately began at Nurex Products. By mid-spring 1942, a dry brown powder, seemingly harmless, had been developed. However, when mixed with gasoline, it transformed into a deadly weapon. The Chemical Warfare Service placed an order for thousands of tons. Dow Chemical also joined in scaling up production. By 1943, America was producing 500,000 pounds of napalm, and by 1944, that figure soared to 8 million pounds. The M69 incendiary bomb was specifically designed for napalm use. Each bomb weighed 2 pounds and contained jellied gasoline, which scattered over a 15-foot radius upon detonation. 38 M69 bombs were housed within an E-46 cluster bomb. When dropped from an aircraft, the cluster opened at 2,000 feet, dispersing individual bombs over a designated area. But before unleashing its fury on Japanese fortifications, napalm had to be tested in Europe. In August 1943, American forces used it during the Allied invasion of Sicily. However, the true test awaited this weapon in the fight against Japanese fortifications, which proved virtually invulnerable to conventional attacks. July 22, 1944, marked the combat debut of the new weapon in the Pacific theater of war. On Tinian Island, part of the Mariana Archipelago, events unfolded that heralded a new era in wartime tactics. Captain Robert Johnson, an officer with the 2nd Marine Division, watched with interest as U.S. Army Air Force's fighter bombers approached. These aircraft carried an unusual cargo, the first samples of napalm, an incendiary mixture intended for testing in real combat conditions. Secretly delivered from the Hawaiian Islands, this gel was meant to be the answer to the tenacious resistance of Japanese troops, who had elevated defense to an art form. The Japanese garrison on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, had meticulously constructed defensive fortifications for several months. The 50th Infantry Regiment and its attached units, totaling about 9,000 men, created an intricate network of caves within the island's coral rocks. Machine gun positions, skillfully camouflaged, controlled every approach to their positions. Artillery pieces were securely hidden on reverse slopes, making them virtually invulnerable to naval bombardments. When the first napalm bombs struck Tinian, Marines observing from the neighboring island of Saipan, just 6 miles away, witnessed an unprecedented sight. Instead of the familiar explosions of high-explosive bombs, a wave of orange flame, like a fiery tsunami, swept across the Japanese fortifications. The incendiary mixture penetrated the smallest cave openings, filled bunkers, and seeped through embrasures. Japanese soldiers, who had endured days of naval bombardment, fled their positions in panic, engulfed in flames. The burning oil adhered stubbornly to everything it touched. The well-known command, stop, drop, and roll, only exacerbated the situation, spreading the fire further. The only way to survive was to immediately abandon the burning position. In his field diary, Marine Corporal James Chen noted with astonishment the scene that unfolded before his binoculars. Japanese soldiers, as if crawling out of hidden labyrinths, whose existence American forces had not even suspected. In desperate attempts to extinguish the flames engulfing their bodies, they rolled on the ground, but the fire continued to consume them. For several days, units of Marines preparing for the assault continuously requested air support, demanding napalm strikes on enemy positions. Thanks to this barrage of fire, Japanese fortifications, which previously took long hours and immense resources to storm, were now neutralized in mere minutes. As a result, Tinian Island was captured by American forces on August 1st. Of the 9,000 Japanese soldiers defending the island, only 313 survived. The triumph on Tinian foreshadowed further successes. On Saipan, Marine flamethrower tank operators discovered that portable flamethrowers demonstrated similar effectiveness in close combat. The M2 flamethrower, capable of spewing a stream of thickened fuel up to 40 yards, was a formidable weapon. However, operators, forced to carry 70 pounds of combustible mixture on their backs, suffered colossal casualties, often exceeding 90% as soon as they revealed themselves. The solution to this problem was offered by the Marine Construction Battalions, known as CBs, who developed a modification of the Sherman tank, equipping it with a CBH-1 flamethrower. These machines, nicknamed Zippo tanks by the Marines, could project a stream of fire up to 150 yards, while providing reliable armored protection for the operators. February 1945 marked the landing of 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima, foreshadowing the monstrous effectiveness of napalm in combating the fortified positions of Japanese troops in the Pacific theater of war. On February 23, 1945, Iwo Jima had become a volcanic hell. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, risking his life, navigated through volcanic ash, dragging an M2 flamethrower. His unit encountered an insurmountable obstacle, a barrage of crossfire from enemy concrete fortifications. Artillery strikes proved ineffective, and naval artillery failed to suppress the firing points. A frontal assault was tantamount to suicide. Williams noticed the ominous barrel of a Japanese Type 92 machine gun peeking from an embrasure. Enemy bullets sparked off the steel tanks on his back as the distance closed, 20 yards, 15 yards. At 10 yards, he pressed the igniter button. A powerful stream of thickened fuel surged into the narrow slit. The bunker instantly transformed into a furnace, where temperatures skyrocketed to crematorium levels in seconds. The concrete walls began to crack under the unbearable heat, and steel rebar deformed and twisted. The machine gun barrel glowed cherry red, then white, and eventually melted. No one inside had any chance of survival. In the pitch black and to the accompaniment of roaring explosions, Williams, like a shadow, made his way to another target, an ingeniously camouflaged underground complex entangled with a network of secret passages. His gaze picked out a narrow ventilation shaft barely wider than 6 inches from the gloom. As if by fate, the flamethrower nozzle fit the opening perfectly. A single pull of the trigger unleashed a fiery hell, and the deadly gel rushed deep into the communication system. Soon, burning Japanese soldiers began to emerge from hidden exits located 50 yards away. The hellish flames licking their bodies seemed impossible to extinguish. In just 4 hours, Williams managed to neutralize 7 major fortified positions, turning into ashes impregnable strongpoints that had previously held back the assault of an entire Marine regiment. For his displayed heroism, he was awarded the highest honor, the Medal of Honor, but the true victor in this skirmish was the deadly weapon he held in his hands. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander of the Japanese garrison on Iwo Jima, had spent a year meticulously transforming the island into an impregnable fortress. His defensive strategy was simple and brutal: force the Americans to pay with rivers of blood for every yard of land gained. Under his leadership, 21,000 soldiers dug miles of underground tunnels into the hard volcanic rock, creating a labyrinth capable of withstanding a prolonged siege. They stocked enough food, water, and ammunition for a month-long defense. Kuribayashi had carefully studied American tactics, well aware of their fondness for overwhelming firepower. He skillfully positioned his defensive structures on reverse slopes out of reach of naval artillery. Forbidding suicidal banzai attacks, he ordered his soldiers to fight to their last breath from fortified positions. Kuribayashi was confident that he had created an impregnable defense capable of withstanding any assault. However, he did not account for one thing: the destructive power of napalm. On the second day of fierce fighting on Iwo Jima, modified Sherman tanks arrived, heralding terror for the Japanese troops. Captain Frank Caldwell, observing the deployment of this formidable equipment, witnessed the first Zippo tank unleash its deadly cargo on an underground fortress that had held back the Marines for 2 days. The tank's flamethrower spewed a column of flame, engulfing the space for 100 yards, deep into the cave with fiery lava. The burning mixture spread, penetrating every passage, every chamber, every hiding place, like water seeking a path. The whole mountain seemed to breathe smoke, Caldwell recalled, and then we heard the screams. Japanese soldiers, engulfed in flames, desperately ran out of the caves, but their fate was sealed. Marines mercilessly eliminated those who tried to escape, while those who remained inside faced a torturous death in the fiery inferno. The underground complex, which military strategists estimated would take a week to clear, was neutralized in just 20 minutes. The 8 flamethrower tanks operating on Iwo Jima expended approximately 10,000 gallons of thickened fuel daily. Each tank required constant support from CB construction battalion teams, who provided maintenance and refueling. Electrician Joseph Klee and shipfitter J.T. Patterson risked their lives under enemy fire, working tirelessly to keep this deadly weapon battle ready. The psychological effect of using flamethrower tanks was overwhelming. Japanese soldiers, who had fought fearlessly against conventional weapons, fled in panic at the sight of these fiery monsters. Intercepted radio messages attested to the growing terror in Japanese ranks. Decoded messages increasingly contained words like devil fire and dragon tanks, reflecting the despair and fear that gripped Iwo Jima's defenders. Tragic memories of napalm's use left an indelible mark on the participants of the battles. Private Toshio Yamada, one of the few Japanese soldiers who survived the bloody battle for Iwo Jima, recalled with bitterness, "We were prepared to die for the Emperor. We were ready to face bullets, shell fragments, and even bayonet charges. But fire, this all-consuming fire, was an entirely different element. It entered our shelters like a living thing, impossible to escape. You couldn't fight it, you couldn't hide from it. It found every one of us." By spring 1945, napalm's destructive power had become so evident that General Curtis LeMay, made a fateful decision that fundamentally altered the war strategy. If the incendiary gel could easily burn out caves and bunkers, what effect could it have when unleashed upon densely populated cities? March 9, 1945, 5:34 p.m. Northfield, Guam. Operation Meeting House began. Major General Curtis LeMay watched with intense focus as the first of 334 B-29 Superfortress bombers gained speed on the runway. Each aircraft carried a deadly payload, 40 cluster bombs containing a total of 1520 M69 incendiary devices. Their target was Tokyo, the heart of the Japanese Empire. For months, LeMay had unsuccessfully tried to establish a system of high-altitude precision bombing. Powerful jet streams over Japan constantly blew bombers off course. Dense cloud cover obscured targets, making aiming virtually impossible. Furthermore, enemy anti-aircraft artillery firing from 30,000 feet was lethally accurate. The results of these bombings were highly unsatisfactory. Taking command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, LeMay realized he needed to drastically change tactics or face inevitable dismissal. The cold arithmetic of destruction spoke for itself. One incendiary cluster could destroy everything in an area 100 by 300 feet. Tokyo's residential quarters consisted of dense wooden houses with paper walls and straw roofs. Japanese war industry largely depended on thousands of small factories and workshops dispersed throughout these residential areas. What could not be precisely targeted could be destroyed by a massive incendiary attack, sweeping away everything in its path. General LeMay made a bold decision, stripping B-29 bombers of their defensive armament to increase their bomb load. His directive stipulated night flights at low altitude, ranging from 2,500 to 2,700 meters. Lowering the altitude promised to improve bombing accuracy and move aircraft out of range of Japanese anti-aircraft artillery. In the early morning of March 10th, shortly after midnight, reconnaissance planes appeared over Tokyo. They marked a vast residential area of approximately 12 square kilometers, home to 750,000 souls, with incendiary bombs laid out in the shape of an X. The main force of bombers, following the scouts, unleashed 1,165 tons of incendiary mixtures on the city, creating a curtain of fire. Within half an hour, individual fires merged into a monstrous firestorm. The temperature at ground level reached unimaginable values, comparable to that of molten lava. The superheated air generated hurricane force winds exceeding 160 kilometers per hour, sucking oxygen from shelters and feeding the flames with fresh air. Concrete boiled, steel structures melted, and the Sumida River turned into a cloud of steam. Captain Susumu Takahashi of the Tokyo Fire Department, in his last report recorded at 048, stated, "The fire is out of control. Equipment is useless. The city is dying." In those days, the Tokyo Fire Department, with 8,000 personnel and 1,000 vehicles, had only 3 ladder trucks capable of reaching heights just over 9 meters. Prepared for conventional bombings and fires, they were utterly unequipped for the inferno that engulfed the city. Napalm gel, as if alive, clung to their equipment, melted hoses, and turned water into scalding steam. By dawn, a vast area of 41 square kilometers was engulfed in flames. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 87,500 people, although Japanese sources claim that over 100,000 souls perished that night. The Tokyo firestorm claimed more lives than any of the atomic bombings, leaving 1 million people homeless. Sergeant James S.R., a B-29 tail gunner, recalled, "At 1,500 meters, you could smell burning flesh. The thermal currents from the fire were so strong that they tossed our 65-ton bomber like an autumn leaf. But General LeMay was only beginning his destructive campaign. The systematic incineration of Japan was gaining momentum. Soon after, on March 11th, Nagoya was devastated when 313 B-29 bombers obliterated the Mitsubishi aircraft engine plant and surrounding areas. Just 2 days later, Osaka's industrial heartland was engulfed in flames so that raged for 72 hours. On March 16, Kobe's port facilities and shipyards were reduced to twisted metal and ash. In 10 days, incendiary raids destroyed more of Japan's industrial capacity than 2 years of conventional bombing. The Air Force faced a severe napalm shortage, consuming it faster than American factories could produce it. Additional production facilities were urgently established, and by June 1945, monthly output reached unprecedented levels. Tactical lessons learned from clearing caves on the islands were now applied strategically to Japan itself, transforming cities into burning ruins. April 1st, 1945, marked the beginning of the Battle of Okinawa, the final and arguably most brutal test of the Pacific Campaign. While Iwo Jima was a complex defensive knot, Okinawa surpassed it in every respect. The island, home to 450,000 civilians, became the epicenter of a clash between 100,000 Japanese soldiers defending every inch of ground and 180,000 American Marines advancing from sea and air. Japanese forces, having turned every tomb, every cave and every hill into an impregnable bastion, were prepared to fight to the last man. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the Japanese forces, learned from the experience of Iwo Jima and ordered his troops to dig deeper, fortify more thoroughly, and prepare for massive fire attacks. Water reservoirs were installed in caves, fire barriers were created in passages, and primitive gear made of wet cloth and mud was devised for fire protection. However, as time proved, these measures were insufficient against American firepower. For the Okinawa operation, the 713th Tank Battalion was completely re-equipped with flamethrower tanks. 54 Sherman tanks were fitted with Ronson flamethrowers, capable of unleashing deadly streams of flame up to 60-80 yards. Navy chemical units prepared a colossal supply of 250,000 gallons of thickened fuel, intended for destroying enemy fortifications. Each Marine company was assigned flamethrower teams armed with portable flamethrowers. The Battle of Uji Ridge vividly demonstrated how napalm became an effective tactical weapon, capable of incinerating entire bunkers and caves, depriving Japanese soldiers of cover and the ability to resist. During battles in the Pacific Theater, Japanese forces resorted to creating complex defensive fortifications on the reverse slopes of elevated positions, making them virtually invulnerable to traditional aerial and artillery bombardment. Marines of the 1st Division faced immense difficulties trying to advance just a few hundred meters, suffering significant casualties over several days. However, on May 14th, the Marines found an innovative solution. They brought barrels filled with incendiary mixture to the ridge's summit, then pierced them with rifle fire and rolled them down directly onto Japanese positions. Additionally, white phosphorus grenades ignited the leaking mixture, turning the gully into a fiery inferno. Fortifications that had held for several days were destroyed in mere hours. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, observing this attack, recalled Japanese soldiers frantically fleeing from previously unknown caves, their bodies and clothing engulfed in flames. Some tried to surrender, but it was too late, as the napalm had already done its work. They dropped dead after a few steps, and the fire continued to burn even after their demise. The psychological impact of these events on the Japanese civilian population was devastating. Thousands had taken refuge in caves, following military instructions. However, as flamethrower tanks approached the caves, they faced a horrific choice: burn alive or emerge into a hail of machine gun fire. On May 30th, Marines discovered a cave near Shuri Castle containing approximately 450 civilians. Lieutenant John Stevens of the 6th Marine Division attempted to persuade them to surrender, but, upon refusal, faced the necessity of using military force. The flamethrower tank crew warned those inside the cave 3 times in Japanese, but, receiving no response, opened fire, directing a lethal stream deep into the cave system. Stevens later recounted that for 5 minutes screams were heard, then silence. When they entered the cave, they found mostly women and children. The flames had consumed all the oxygen, and most had suffocated before the fire reached them. Lieutenant Stevens expressed the opinion that this was a form of mercy. In the archives of the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service, every instance of flamethrower weapon use was meticulously recorded. On Okinawa, flamethrower tanks discharged a total of 200,000 gallons of deadly thickened fuel. Powerful underground fortifications, which would have taken weeks to neutralize with conventional means, succumbed to the onslaught of flame in mere hours. Japanese strongholds, capable of halting the advance of entire divisions, fell under the assault of flamethrower tank units. However, the price paid in civilian lives was horrific. According to estimates, the use of flamethrower weapons resulted in the deaths of at least 20,000 civilians on Okinawa, though exact figures remain hotly debated. The weapon, initially designed to save American soldiers' lives, proved monstrously indiscriminate in its destructive impact. Colonel Unmak's flamethrower unit, which grew out of small construction battalions, Seabees, evolved into a large, well-organized military structure. Production facilities in Hawaii operated tirelessly around the clock. Monthly, hundreds of flamethrower tank operators completed intensive training programs, preparing for deployment to the front. America's industrial might transformed Fee's laboratory discovery into large-scale production of a deadly weapon. By the summer of 1945, this transformation process was complete. The Pacific theater of war had turned into an apocalyptic firestorm, sweeping away everything in its path. In the summer of 1945, the air campaign reached its zenith. Under General LeMay's command, B-29 bombers systematically delivered incendiary strikes with methodical precision. Initially, major cities were targeted, but now smaller industrial towns were added to the list. Intelligence identified approximately 180 Japanese urban areas that could become targets for fire attacks. By the end of July, 67 cities had been attacked, with varying degrees of destruction. In some cities, entire districts were wiped out, while in others, key industrial facilities were damaged. The scale of destruction was simply unimaginable. Each B-29 could carry up to 40 cluster bombs, and a raid involving 300 aircraft could unleash approximately 500,000 individual incendiary devices on the enemy. Each bomb, upon impact, created a fire source about 4.5 meters in diameter that burned for 6 minutes, generating temperatures sufficient to melt aluminum. Japan's firefighting system proved utterly ineffective against this new threat. Throughout July, one city after another suffered devastating attacks. For instance, on July 19th, Fukui lost 60% of its area. On July 26th, Matsuyama was 3/4 destroyed, and on July 28th, the city of Su suffered 85% destruction. This systematic campaign was conducted with incredible industrial efficiency, with each raid refining methods learned from previous ones. Japanese industrial production plummeted. Workers, realizing their factories were targets, refused to report for duty. The transportation system was paralyzed due to burning rail depots. Food distribution ceased as warehouses were destroyed by fire. The home front, which had supported Japan's war effort for 4 years, crumbled under the relentless torrent of flames. Former Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoe noted in his diary, "The Americans have found our Achilles heel. We built a nation of wood and paper, and now it is systematically and methodically being destroyed by fire. There is no escape from this infernal flame," was the verdict of the Japanese people confronted with the new reality of the war. The Imperial Army desperately tried to find a way out of the situation. Engineers created fire breaks by sacrificing entire city blocks, built underground bunkers with multiple exits, and distributed primitive protective gear made of treated fabric among the populace. However, all these measures proved futile. The burning napalm mixture penetrated everywhere, leaving no chance for survival in any shelter. Dr. Yoshio Nishi, a prominent Japanese physicist, was tasked with developing effective protective measures. But his report to Imperial General Headquarters was disheartening. Napalm's adhesive properties made it virtually impossible to remove once ignited, and its burning temperature exceeded all tolerable limits for known materials. The only way to defend was to prevent the enemy from delivering the deadly payload, but after losing air superiority, this task became impossible. August 3, 1945, marked the active preparation for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, scheduled for November. Military strategists meticulously analyzed the experiences of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, taking into account the extensive Japanese defensive preparations on Kyushu. Intelligence revealed the presence of 10,000 caves, 5,000 bunkers, and extensive underground communication networks. A direct assault could result in colossal losses for the American army, estimated at 1 million casualties. As a solution, an incendiary war of unprecedented scale was chosen. The plan called for deploying 75 flamethrower tank battalions, comprising over 4,000 units. Chemical units were tasked with stockpiling 5 million gallons of thickened fuel. Every rifle company was to have organic flamethrower teams. Heavy B-29 bombers were to conduct massive incendiary bombardments ahead of ground troop advances. Under Secretary of War Robert Patterson equated the production of flamethrower tanks in priority to the Manhattan Project. All of America's industrial might was thrown into producing incendiary weapons, but the invasion never took place. August 6, 1945 went down in history as the day the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima instantly ended 70,000 lives. News of the monstrous destruction wrought by a single explosion shocked the global community. However, General Curtis LeMay, who directed the strategic bombing of Japan, remained unflustered. Under his command, American aircraft had already subjected 67 Japanese cities to massive incendiary bomb attacks, many of which lay in ruins. Tokyo alone lost more residents to fire than Hiroshima did to the atomic blast. Undoubtedly, the atomic bomb had a resounding effect, But the cumulative damage from systematic incendiary raids was far more significant. On August 9th, like an ominous echo of Hiroshima, an atomic mushroom cloud rose over Nagasaki, another Japanese city wiped off the map. But on that very same day, as if unwilling to yield to the atomic bomb, 95 B-29 bombers unleashed their deadly payload, incendiary bombs, on Yawata. The city was consumed by a monstrous fire that raged for 2 days. On August 14th, just hours before Japan's surrender, American aircraft delivered the final massive strike. While Japanese diplomats engaged in tense negotiations over the terms of peace, 160 B-29 bombers attacked Kumagaya and Isesaki, turning them into burning ruins. Flames continued to devour Japanese cities as the nation's fate was decided in high offices. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender. In his historic speech, he mentioned a new and most cruel bomb, referring to atomic weapons, but made no mention of the weapon that had destroyed much of his country. Statistical data paints a picture of total devastation. Between March and August 1945, massive incendiary bomb attacks reduced 180 square miles of territory across 67 Japanese cities to ash. These barbaric bombings resulted in the deaths of 300,000 to 500,000 innocent civilians, left 8 million people homeless, and destroyed 40% of the country's industrial capacity. A 1946 report by the National Defense Research Committee stated that 40,000 tons of M69 incendiary bombs were dropped on Japanese cities. Thus, the Pacific War concluded not with the dazzling flash of an atomic explosion, but with the slow, dying embers of countless fires that had consumed entire cities. It was time to take stock. Professor Louis Fieser returned to Harvard, to his chemical laboratory, where his work on the deadly weapon began. He was awarded the Medal for Merit, the nation's highest civilian honor. His invention was believed to have hastened the war's end, saved countless American soldiers' lives, and revolutionized warfare. However, this victory had a bitter taste. In 1967, amidst the Vietnam War, Fieser could not tear his eyes away from the television screen, broadcasting horrifying footage of napalm use. Children ran frantically along roads, their bodies engulfed in flames. Villages turned into scorched earth. The weapon he had created to destroy enemy fortifications was now being used against civilians. In June 1972, Fieser appealed to President Nixon to impose an international ban on napalm. When we developed napalm, we never anticipated it would be used against people. We thought of destroying buildings and fortifications. I won't judge the morality of napalm's use merely because I invented it, but I am convinced its use should be strictly limited. Edward David Jr., Nixon's science advisor, responded evasively, noting that the consequences of napalm use were difficult to predict and control, and assured Fieser's proposal would be carefully considered. Fieser called it a brush-off. He passed away in 1977. His obituary, published in the Harvard Gazette, mentioned his research on vitamin K and anti-malarial drugs. No mention was made of his work on napalm. The university chose to consign this dark episode in his biography to oblivion. The era of static fortifications was over, yielding to new combat tactics. No bunker could withstand the pervasive flames. No cave could offer reliable refuge from the fiery element. Even impregnable volcanic fortresses, carved into rock and defended with maniacal tenacity, fell before a weapon developed within the walls of Harvard University. In 1946, the 713th Tank Battalion ceased to exist. Flamethrower tanks were scrapped and their unique equipment destroyed. The engineers who created these machines returned to civilian life. Colonel Unmar's flamethrower group was disbanded, and all related documents were classified. Veterans of those battles were reluctant to share their memories. Marine Corporal Raymond Hart, a participant in the battles for Iwo Jima, succinctly remarked, "The flamethrower guys did their job." Woody Williams, the last Medal of Honor recipient for Iwo Jima, dedicated himself to caring for the families of fallen comrades, avoiding talk of the weapon that brought him fame. Eugene Sledge, reflecting on the war, wrote, "We thought the Japanese were cruel, but then the flamethrowers came. War turns men into monsters." The military outcomes of deploying this horrific innovation were undeniable. Technological superiority crushed their unyielding spirit. Chemicals proved stronger than soldiers' bravery. Industrial might demonstrated its decisive role, eclipsing military valor. Japan's centuries-old samurai tradition, which had been its backbone, was annihilated in infernal flames. Modern military theorists learned lessons from this tragedy. Virtually all leading armies worldwide acquired their own flamethrower weapons. The international community made efforts to establish norms regulating the use of incendiary weapons. The 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons introduced specific restrictions, but a complete ban never materialized. The weapon that marked the end of one war was subsequently used in many other armed conflicts. The scientific advancements resulting from the development of this weapon proved ambiguous. Research into gelled petroleum spurred the development of polymer chemistry, fire suppression technologies, and material science. The same aluminum salt compounds that gave gasoline its viscosity found applications in various industries and medicine. Knowledge gained from studying the thermal effects of fire contributed to advances in burn treatment. However, moral dilemmas remained unresolved. Was the incendiary bombing of Tokyo a war crime? Can the civilian casualties on Okinawa be justified by military necessity? Did the use of incendiary weapons shorten the conflict enough to justify its horrific consequences? Historians continue to debate these questions, finding no definitive answers. In Japan, survivors of the bombings formed the Tokyo Air Raid Victims Association, meticulously documenting eyewitness accounts and preserving the memory of the tragic events. Museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe became custodians of grim exhibits, melted household items, photographs capturing the scale of destruction, and sorrowful lists of the deceased. The younger generation learns about the horrifying night of black snow, when burning debris rained down like ominous precipitation. Warfare underwent a fundamental transformation. The Pacific Campaign, which began with a daring torpedo bomber attack on Pearl Harbor, concluded with the systematic annihilation of Japanese cities by fire. During this period, the nature of military operations changed beyond recognition. The bravery and the individual skill of soldiers still played an important role, but technological advancement and the power of industrial production became the decisive factors for victory. In the caves of Iwo Jima, decades later, coral formations still bear traces of soot from flamethrower tanks. On Okinawa, in sealed caves, lie the remains of those who chose a fiery martyrdom over capture. In Tokyo, memorial parks mark the sites where entire city blocks were wiped off the map in a single night. Professor Fies's invention was a strikingly simple formula: aluminum naphthenate, aluminum palmitate, and gasoline, combined, produced terrifying napalm. The mathematical calculations of war gave way to chemistry. Chemical processes of destruction became an integral part of industrial production. The era of localized conflicts came to an end. In September 1945, General Curtis LeMay stood amidst the smoking ruins of Tokyo, surveying a scene of unimaginable devastation. His words were a stark statement of fact. We incinerated and boiled alive more people that terrible night than died from the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. He then added, as if in justification, "But it was war. They started it, we finished it." The Pacific Ocean became a silent witness to the dawn of a new era of total war, where the main protagonist was not so much the atomic weapon that echoed around the world, but rather a humble Jill with an unquenchable thirst for fire. Napalm forever changed the face of their war. This weapon, born within the walls of a Harvard laboratory, claimed more Japanese lives than any other American weapon. It mercilessly consumed a country that naively believed in its divine protection. A post-war study of strategic bombing led to a sobering conclusion. It revealed that Japan was, in fact, prepared to surrender by November 1945, even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, and even if the Soviet Union had not entered the war. It was the systematic incendiary bombing campaign, more than anything else, that broke Japan's will to resist. The creation and deployment of incendiary weapons marked a dark chapter in human history, leaving a profound mark on the lives of both its developers and its victims. The scientists whose minds created this destructive weapon faced a heavy moral dilemma. Louis Oasa, like many other chemists and engineers involved in the development of incendiary weapons, expressed deep regrets about the consequences of their creations. Engineers from construction battalions who repurposed flamethrower tanks left few records of their work, but their role in transforming a creative force into an instrument of destruction cannot be forgotten. For the Japanese who survived the inferno, the trauma proved indelible. Children who fled the flames carried nightmares throughout their lives. Even the smell of gasoline could trigger panic attacks decades later, and burn scars served as a constant reminder of the horror endured. Paradoxically, however, a new reality emerged from the ashes and devastation. Japan, once reduced to ruins by American incendiary bombings, became one of America's most reliable allies. Cities obliterated from the face of the earth rose from the ashes, transforming into thriving centers of commerce and culture. Tokyo, which endured the most destructive air raid in history, is now one of the world's greatest metropolises. Military academies worldwide study the Pacific incendiary bombing campaign as an example of strategic mastery, but also as a grim reminder of the brutality and totality of war. The use of incendiary weapons in military conflicts demonstrated how a single weapon system can be applied on various scales, from destroying individual fortifications to leveling entire urban areas. Modern international legal norms seek to regulate the use of these weapons, and the 1980 Protocol on Incendiary Weapons imposes certain restrictions, though it does not mandate a complete ban. Unfortunately, considerations of military expediency often outweigh humanitarian principles. In Japan, memories of the massive incendiary bombings play a significant role in shaping public consciousness. For some, it serves as a reminder of the destructive consequences of militaristic policies. For others, it is evidence of the inhumane cruelty of war. For most, however, it is simply a profound human tragedy, the repetition of which must be avoided at all costs. Each year, the number of survivors attending annual memorial events steadily declines. In the United States, the attitude towards incendiary bombings is more complex and ambiguous. In the American historical narrative, the emphasis is primarily on the atomic bombings, while the systematic destruction of cities using incendiary weapons, which caused even more casualties, remains largely overlooked. This selective approach to historical memory seemingly serves a purpose. It is psychologically easier for society to justify the use of 2 atomic bombs than to acknowledge a months-long campaign of systematic incendiary bombings. It took just 3 years for technological progress to advance from FISA's laboratory walls to the tragic ruins of Tokyo. In this short period, napalm, once a scientific curiosity, transformed into one of the most destructive of conventional weapons known to humankind. And today, despite the decades that have passed, napalm and its derivatives continue to remain in the arsenals of many countries worldwide, maintaining their sinister operating principle, a jelly-like fuel capable of adhering to surfaces and burning with relentless intensity. Professor FISA dedicated the remainder of his life to teaching and writing chemistry textbooks alongside his wife, Mary. He rarely spoke of napalm, preferring to focus on his other achievements. Nevertheless, the awareness of the gravity of his creation never left him. In moments of solitude, he pondered how things might have turned out differently. However, these questions remained unanswered, for he understood that if not for him, someone else would inevitably have created a similar weapon. The chemical principles were too simple, the military necessity too great, and the industrial potential too vast. With the advent of modern chemistry and modern warfare, the creation of such a weapon became virtually inevitable. The use of napalm revealed a fundamental truth. In total war, human ingenuity in destruction knows no bounds. The same industrial power capable of improving human lives can be directed towards their mass annihilation. As the last witnesses to those events pass away, their memories become history. Burn scars fade with time, destroyed cities are rebuilt, and traumas heal. But the potential for such destruction to recur never disappears. The war ended, the flames subsided, but the questions raised by the use of napalm continue to burn in people's hearts. The lesson taught by those tragic events is clear. In an era of total war, victory goes to those capable of producing the most terrible weapons and possessing the will to use them. Japan's defensive fortifications, carved into volcanic rock and defended with fanatical bravery, fell under the assault of American incendiary weapons. The Pacific stronghold burned to ashes, and from its embers arose a modern world, forever changed by a weapon conceived in a university laboratory, tested on a football field, and unleashed across the Pacific Islands until it consumed an entire empire.